Hello, and welcome back to another episode of bringing the Forgotten Kings back to life. Kids are already in bed, so this will be a more silent episode. I will be following the tutorial. I've already got a sword here that I'm going to be working on. This is a pretty good start for my NFT that I have, and so I'm going to be watching his video again and kind of reproducing everything he did on his sword on this, just to get similar environmental effects. So it will be mostly silent except for that video, and here we go.
Whenever you hit G, we can now activate a snapping mode, which is X, Y, or Z, which is going to be snapping it to a specific coordinate axis. Now, for me, this isn't an easy thing to do. My brain doesn't really like to do this. I encourage you to practice this. Another option that we have here is using middle mouse button. So we have G, and then we can do middle mouse button and hold to snap it to a specific axis as well. And this is going to be consistent with rotation as well, like this. Scaling as well, middle mouse button, or we can use the XYZ snap. Now, the way I like to do is with the Lazy Viewport add-on, which is a custom add-on we built at CG Fast Track. There'll be a link down in the description for this as well. Just github.com/cgfasttrack/lazy viewport. And then we do is we just go to code, and then we just do download a zip file like that. And then from here, wherever you have your downloads, just right-click it, and then you just do extract all. I'm just going to go and extract that. And then we dive inside of that folder, and there'll be this lazyviewport.py. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that path. I'm going to go back to Blender and go to Edit, and then Preferences. So we haven't jumped in here, but we'll be touching up on this as we go. We'll go down to the Add-ons tab right here, and we'll just go to Install right up here. And then we'll go ahead and navigate to our lazyviewport.py, and then we'll just do Install Add-on. So an add-on is just a plugin for Blender. It's a very, very common. I'll click and drag all the way down, somewhere around 4/5 down. Go ahead and close that. And then what I'll do here is just go into my verse selection here, go to my scale tool, select these, and I want to make sure I have those all selected down here. So I'm going to go to my wireframe mode really quick and just select them right there to make sure I have all those are selected. And I'm just going to scale this in. And after I scale this, I'm going to try to get it close as I can down to be perfectly sharp. But what we can do is in our resize menu down here, after we do that last action, we can just do a value of 0 with this scale. And I'll just snap it so it's going to be perfectly sharp. Go back to my solid mode up here. Go and zoom that out. Check that out. That's looking pretty good. And then the next step, we'll start working out the groove. We're going to implement the groove right down the center of our blade. So I'm going to come down here, just select all this, Q, frame selected, and then I'm going to go ahead and add in some loop cuts right down the center right here. So loop cut right here. I'll go ahead and just click right there. Make sure our factor is set to 0. And then do the same thing over here. Just click right there, and then make sure our factor is set to 0. And then what I do is jump into my wireframe tool right here, jump into my scale tool by hitting S, and I'm going to select these verts right here, and just going to scale these in just like that. A Q frame selected to zoom in here a little bit more. Scale those in, nice and tight. And then what we want to do is select the center one right here. Just going to scale those back so that these are going to be flush right there. And now we'll go ahead and just work on the top of here. So I'll go ahead and select all the way up here. Q frame selected. And then we got some polygons up here that are sitting up here in the faces. So we'll go to 3 to select those faces, select each one of these. So I'll select each one by hitting shift left click and then X and then delete faces just to get rid of those at the top. Go to my vert mode, select those right there, and then bring those in somewhere right in there. We want the base to be pretty bulky, somewhere right in there. And then I'll go ahead and select these right here in the middle and go and scale that in like that, somewhere right in there. And now if I go to my solid mode, now we can actually check out and see how this is looking overall. And that's looking pretty good. So now we need to add in those details that live up here at the top. Go back in edit mode, and what we're going to do is add in 2 more loop cuts. So loop cut, click and drag all the way up. Do one right there. That's going to be the base of that little groove detail right there. And then do another one that's going to be right in here. I'm going to go back into my scale mode, hit 1 to go on my verts, select these at the top, keyframe selected to get in there. And what we want to do is just go back into wireframe mode and go ahead and select these and go ahead and scale these in like this. So the groove detail is essentially going to be welded out down there. It's going to start small and then get big. And after we scale that in, we're going to just select the center ones right here. So keyframe selected to get in there a little bit closer, and then select those and then go ahead and move that up like this. So we want this to be flush as well. So I'm going to go back into my solid mode after we have this selected, and we want it to be somewhere right in here where you can see at the top right there. We want that to be a perfect triangle like that. And then go back to my wireframe mode, select these 2 right in the center, and do the same thing. Just get that as close as possible that we can to making that a triangle. Somewhere right in there. I'll go ahead and look at this in object mode, see how that's looking. It's looking pretty good. So now last steps are just going to be to add a bevel modifier. That's just going to make sure that the sword is going to hold its shape. We'll go ahead and add modifier, add subdivision surface as well. Go into object mode to see what it's looking like. We'll just right click, shade smooth on that. And that's looking pretty good overall. So from here, you can see, okay, our edges over here are looking a little soft. So if we want to sharpen up any of the edges, all we have to do is go back into edit mode over here. I'm going to go ahead and collapse my bevel, my subdivision. I'm going to turn both of those off in edit mode. And we'll go ahead and just add in a loop cut down here. So we can add a loop cut on the edge right there, edge right here, just to make those sharper. And we're going to do one for the groove as well. One right there, and then one right there. And I'll go back into scale mode, go into object mode, check that out. And that's looking pretty good. And the last thing that we want to do before we wrap this up, if you're having this little issue down here where your tip looks a little black, all we need to do is jump in edit mode again, and then just add another loop cut down here. And I'll just tighten that up and so it's a little bit sharper. So subdivision modifier holds its form a little bit better. Great, and we'll start working on the textures and shaders next. So here's where we're headed. We're going to take our model, and we're going to turn it into our texture and shaded version of this asset. And as we move forward, the first thing that we're going to need to do is talk about UVs and apply UVs to our model. This Twitter post is a great visual representation of how UVs work and why we need them. So we have our chocolate over here that's represented in our 3D mesh, and then we have the unwrapped version of that, which is going to be represented as our texture. And the UVs is basically a flattened version of that 3D object. You think of your 3D object as your mesh, and then your UVs are going to be a 2D version of your object. And they're basically the in-between stage before you can apply texture to your material. So you think of your mesh as your 3D object, and then your UVs as your 2D version of the object. And that's what gives us the ability to have this 3D object communicate with the 2D texture. This could be a JPEG, cargo, whatever it may be, and apply it to our 3D mesh. So this is what broken UVs look like, and this is what we're going to find with our model as well. Whenever we have like a scrambled UV, we get this kind of stuff where we get this weird stretching happening whenever we apply the texture and all of that. So let's go ahead and take a look at that now. So before we jump into Blender, we got this UV checkers. This is going to be located in the downloads below. We're going to be using this to apply as our test texture for our object. So to start, we're just going to set up a basic material. We're going to select our blade right here, and then go down to our material tab and just set this up. If you don't see material here, all you have to do is just, I'm going to go ahead and click X, and then I'm just going to click new to start with a fresh material. If you already see material there, you can just stick with that one. I'm going to go ahead and go to base color and assign a texture. It's the same exact thing that we did with our Minecraft scene. So I'm going to go to image structure, and then I'm going to navigate to my, after our open button right here, I'm going to navigate to our texture. and then just apply UV-checkers.jpg to that. That'll be in the downloads below. So whenever we apply, we don't see anything yet, right? Because we're currently in solid mode. We talked a bit about this before. If we switch to rendered mode, we can now start to see this texture applied. But the problem with this is that we don't actually want to do a render calculation because it is pretty heavy. So what we're going to do is we're going to stay in solid mode. We're going to choose these options down here. So if we come in here, when we did our render tab up here, we played with this before where we turn on our scene world and HDRIs and all that. This dialog box changes for each mode we're on here. So I'm going to click here on solid mode and then go up here to these options and it'll control. These are basically our viewport display options right here. So long story short, there's a lot of really good stuff in here. What we want to do now is just click this little texture icon right here. And I'll just make sure that we can see that in the viewport. So you can see now, okay, this is clearly broken. The checkers don't look like they're supposed to, right? I'm going to go to material here and I'm just going to go ahead and rename this to be checkers. So our material is going to be called checkers. Then what we'll do now is just assign this to the rest of the objects. I'm going to select my guard, hit material, click checkers, select this. I'm going to go and Q frame selected, zoom in here, and then select our checkers material for that, and then continue that all the way up. And there we go. And now you can see, okay, now we got a wide range of results, right? This one's super stretched. That one's super stretched. This one kind of looks okay. This one looks a little better. We have a lot of random stuff happening here, right? So why are some of these looking okay and why are not? Well, this was just a cylinder that we started with. And if we apply, or if we just add in some primitive shapes, so I'm going to go to add up here and mesh. We'll just go to cube, and then I'll go ahead and move this over, and then I'll go ahead and add mesh, and then go to cylinder. So I'm going to also assign our checkers material to this, that one, and then this one. So primitive shapes in Blender, whenever we go to add mesh creates, they're going to come with some sort of UVs. And usually the problem isn't there until we start modifying these, right? So you can see our handle right here, we didn't do that much modifications, so it doesn't look too bad. Our guard though, we did a lot of modifications, so it looks pretty bad. Same thing with our blade here, and then our palm up here too. We got all this stretching and stuff happening there. So this is what we want to do for the next couple of chapters is learn how to just get this checkerboard texture to look correct before we can then move on to our textures and shaders. We're going to start working on that next. For me, the toughest part about learning 3D modeling when I first started was following along with the video. It was very easy to miss this button, very easy to miss that button, and before you know, you have to stop, rewind, and struggle to find just the next step to the process. This is a brutally exhausting process, which is why we at cgfasttrack.com built a step-by-step screenshot application and we put it into every single one of our courses. This would have saved me so much time and frustration and makes it so much easier and enjoyable to learn 3D animation. After you're done watching the video here on so here's where we're going to take our UV'd model and we're going to apply these textures and shaders. So before we jump into the original scene, this is the final result that I have here. So I just want to break down what we're going to be working on. So you can see here we got like this grungy metallic shader. We have this rune effect here. We have this rune effect there. We got this different handle material. That's all the stuff that we're going to be focused on now. So to get started, we're going to take a look at the shading view tab right over here. So shading tab, what is shading tab? So before we move any further, what I'm going to do is just select my cylinder here, select my cube, hit X, and then delete. And then what I'm going to do is zoom in here and keyframe selected on my guard here. And then we're just going to look at this right here. And we're just going to talk about what we're looking at here. So this right here is what we call our shading network. That is what the shading tab is referring to right here. Again, this is a custom display that we have here. I'll set up for this. We have our viewport right here. The only thing different about this is that we're in this material preview mode. So material preview mode is similar to like solid mode, right? We have rendered mode. The only difference is it's like an in-between. It's not gonna be our final render. It's not gonna be our preview, but it's gonna be a way for us to see our materials and our shaders and our textures in a quick and efficient way. So you can see we have our HDRI setup. So we talked a bit about those before. Really useful. And it just gives us a way to very clearly see our object. We have our object menu up here. All that's gonna be the same. We have our properties over here, outliner, which we'll talk about in a bit. And then over here, we have two different things. This is going to be just a quick way for us to display our textures, which we're not going to really use here. I do use this, but we're going to skip over for now. And this is going to be our texture view as well. We're going to skip over this one as well. We're just going to mainly focus on this right here and this right here. But before we get into here, let's explain what we're looking at right here. So this is checkers right here, right? So we know what this is before. If we come down here to our material tab, we notice we have checkers right there. So that is the checkers material that we made before. And now we're seeing it over here, right? So this network right here is a node-based way to do exactly what we're doing down here in our material tab, right? So back when we were adding in our textures, when we, add in the UV checkers.jpg, whenever we, adjusted our Minecraft textures, this is all of that in a node-based form. So what is node-based? Basically what that means is instead of, working in this stacked view, we're going to work in this node view, which is basically these things right here. You can see how like they're all networked together, which we're going to talk about. So let's break down what we're seeing here in our shading view, in our shading node graph right here. So these are nodes, and nodes, if you've never worked with them before, they're a completely different world. So you have layer-based applications like Photoshop, and then we have our 3D viewport, which is basically a bunch of nodes that are actually just displayed in 3D form. And down here we have our shading view, which is comprised of nodes. So you can think of this down here as like kind of working in Photoshop, but it's no longer layers, but it's going to be networks of things. So we have our UV checkers.jpg, our principal BSDF, and our material output. What are these things? So this is our texture, this is our shader, and this is our material. What's the difference between these things? So when we built Minecraft, we talked about materials, we talked about textures, we talked about how we can assign a texture to a material, and that's going to give us our Minecraft. We can see all that. But we haven't really talked about this thing called a shader before. So textures are basically going to be that 2D image that we assign to our material. But our shader is actually how we control the properties like specularity. Is it metallic? Is it going to be flat, more dusty type of material? Those are what shaders are going to do. And when we combine them, that's going to make up our material. So we have our texture right here, we have our shader right here, and then our material output, you can really think of a material as the container itself. It's everything together. It's not just a shader, it's not just the textures, it's all of it together. The network itself makes the material. All right, so in the next chapter, we're going to talk about how to actually manipulate this stuff. So step one of getting our materials is to go from a flat shader to adding in our grunge maps and our metallic and all those properties, and then we're going to add in the runes last. So to start, we're going to focus on the blade, and we're going to create our first shader network. So after clicking new on a new shader, we get this principled BSDF. What is this principled BSDF? I'm going to expand this so we can see this a little bit more. So we're going from here to there with our subdivision. And so we're going from here to there with our subdivision. And basically what subdivision do is just a way of smoothing out our object. We're going to take a look at modifiers this time. So modifiers, the modifier type is going to be right here. And the reason why these are so important is because they're a non-destructive way to work inside of Blender when it comes to modeling operations. And non-destructive basically means, if we want to undo that original extrusion that we did to make this thick, we can't really do that without having to undo a bunch of times and then come back and then redo it. So you can think of non-destructive as procedural as a way to be able to modify it after you apply the operation. Now, while we're going to be working with our modifiers, we can just jump back out into object mode. We don't need to be in edit mode. So these are going to be things that we apply on top of our object. And if we go up here and select this, and then we come over here and we'll just go to our subdivision right here, subdivision surface, you notice our object now gets smooth. So let's break down what's happening here. I'm going to tab back into edit mode and then tab back and forth between object and edit mode. So we'll see that while we're in edit mode, we're going to see this cage mesh. That is our original mesh. And then the final result is what we're going to see right here, right? So this is our cage mesh. This is our subdivided mesh. Now, the reason why this is so important is because we can simply now click this little X spot right there. We can remove that subdivision modifier and we can reapply it anytime we want, right? So it's going to be an operation on top of our model. And then what we can do here is if we go back into edit mode, if we wanted to do something like with all of these selected, what we can do is simply do another extrusion. We can do another extrude along normals. And you can see here, now we can model with the subdivision surface on top of it, which is really, really cool. This is one of my favorite areas of Blender comparing it to other 3D applications like Maya, for example. Super, super powerful. So the subdivision surface modifier, let's break down what we see over here. At the top row right here, we have the ability to enable and disable depending on which location we're in. So the first one is going to be our display cage mesh. For the most part, I have this off all the time, so I'm going to disable that just so I can model with my cage mesh on. So I'm going to be viewing the cage mesh and modeling based off that. Next up, we have edit mode. So if we have that off, basically what happens is if we toggle between object mode and edit mode, it's only going to be visible in object mode now. So we're turning off the ability to see this in edit mode. So I'm going to turn that back on. And then we have our viewport display or our real-time display. So this one's turning off completely, so we can't see it inside of the viewport at all. If we go to render image up here, all of a sudden we'll start to be able to see that again. And the last button we have here is display and render. So if we hit the render button again up here, we now see, okay, now it's not going to be displayed in render. So now it's completely turned off. So how do we want to work? Well, for the most part, we just leave these by default. I'll be playing around with these as we go and showing you guys a couple different techniques on when I use them, when I don't. And then from here, what we do is, we have just two different options in here. We'll have levels in the viewport and then render. So basically what this means is how much do we want to see in the viewport itself. I'm going to put a value of 2 here. And then how much do we actually want to see whenever we hit render image right here. And we're just going to leave that as a value of 2. And there we go. Last thing we want to talk about is just the smoothing of the normals. You notice how our polygons look kind of weird right now. They're kind of, we see all these different faces. If we just simply right click here and then just do shade smooth, so we want to make sure that we're in object mode right now. So if you notice, if we go back to edit mode and right click, we don't see that, right? So right clicking is going to be different depending on if we're in edit mode or in object mode. So I'm going to go object mode, right click and shade smooth. And that's just going to smoothen all that out. Great. We're going to take a look at the bevel modifier next. So a bevel modifier is basically how we control the edges. So you can see here, these edges are really soft and really round, and then these edges are nice and crisp. So that's what a bevel modifier is going to help us do. And we can take another look right here with a cube. So this is just a simple cube with a bevel modifier put on top of it. It's just helping us control how round the edges are. So back here in my gear scene, so we find the bevel modifier inside of our add modifier list over here. But before we actually add this, we want it to actually happen before we put on the subdivision surface. So if we actually put our modifier on here and we go bevel, we notice that we don't actually see any different. In fact, it kind of gets worse in the sense that, we get these faceted edges back, right, where we actually see those polygons coming back up. And this is happening because the modifier stack works from top down. So whatever operation you have up here is going to be applied first, and then this operation is going to be applied second, and so on and so forth. So it's the opposite of what you expect from like a Photoshop stack, and then all these operations happen on top of each other. So what I'm going to do here is simply exit out of our subdivision modifier right here. And that's just going to allow us to work with the bevel. And to be able to see this a little bit better, what I'm going to do is come up here to my viewport shaded mode right up there, or my wireframe mode right here. And we talked about solid mode, talked about render mode. Now we're going to jump into wireframe mode, which is we're going to be getting into this a lot whenever we get into modeling. And wireframe, and we're going to be switching back and forth between wireframe and solid a lot. And this is going to help us actually see the cage of our mesh. And you can see here what the modifier is doing now. If I want to come in here and just toggle on this real-time display, you can see here's before and after. So it's going to be rounding our edges. And we have a couple different controls to get to know in here. The first one's going to be amount. So if we want this to be a little bit brighter, we can turn that up. So if we do something like, a value of go all the way up. So you can see here that if we go up too high, it's actually going to stop. That's happening because this length right there is only going to allow it to go so far. So if I make this a value of something like 0.1, for example, or 0.05, maybe go a little bit lower than that, 0.01, we can see that we have, okay, now we're starting to see some results. So 0.03, 0.05, we can start to see that we have some changes happening here. And next up, we have our segment. So how many polygons do we actually want to see? If we switch this up to something like 3, we see, okay, now the edges become even more round, right? Just by boosting up the segments here. And then the last thing that we want to get to know is going to be limit method. So limit method is basically going to be how we choose this based on an angle. I'm going to choose angle right here. And basically what that says is based on this angle right here, how sharp is it? And if it's sharp enough between this angle right here, which is 30 degrees, it's going to apply the operation. So you notice that, if we turn this off, we have this right here. And as soon as we switch this over to angle, we all of a sudden don't have it. That's because it's eliminated based on this angle, 30 degrees. So for example, this edge that is being beveled is essentially 0 degrees, so it's not going to actually find it based on this value. Now if we go up on this, something like 60, for example, you notice these edges get shot because this is a less than that 60 degree angle. And if we can go higher, something like 80, I think 80, 60 will probably be the same result, but essentially this is going to be a 90 degree angle right here. So for us setting that at 80 degrees right there, that's going to be us telling Blender only do sharp corners and then leave the rest alone, which is exactly what we want in this specific case. Now if we go over to solid mode again up here, what we can see here, if we now drop in our subdivision modifier, we now get a nice smooth surface that makes a little bit more sense for what we want. I'm just going to go ahead and change the level displays to 2, and there we go. And that's that. That's going to wrap it up for the gear. So the sword's going to be what we're moving into next. And it's going to be, a good transition, but it's going to be a challenge. So what you want to do is make sure you're comfortable modeling out this gear. So I recommend doing it 5 different times and continue doing it. You can follow along with the step-by-step screenshots underneath you, down below. And then keep doing this until you can do it by memory. You don't need the video. You don't need the step-by-step screenshots anymore. And after you can do this by memory, then you'll be ready to do the sword in the next chapter. All right, so here's where we're ready. We're going to start working on our sword model. And the very first step is going to be to block in the basic shapes. So look at this a little bit closer. We're basically just going to block in with some cubes, some cylinders, and a couple more cylinders. And just like you're painting a picture or sketching a sketch, we're going to start with our broad strokes, and then we'll slowly add in the fine details over here. So we're going to work on this now. So I'm in a new scene. You can just do File, New, General. And basically, I got a little preset set up here. I'm going to show you really quick. But I have my sword in here. I'm going to keep this in here just to reference, just so I can point out what we're going to be doing. You don't need to have this in your scene. You can start with the first scene. So step 1 of getting our materials is to go from a flat shader to adding in our grunge maps and our metallic and all those properties. And then we're going to add in the runes last. So to start, we're going to focus on the blade, and we're going to create our first shader network. So after clicking New on a new shader, we get this principled BSDF. What is this principled BSDF? We're going to expand this so we can see this a little bit more. So the main properties that we're going to want to get to know are things like base color, which is going to change the actual color. For now, since we're going to be using all the controls over here, we don't actually need the properties panel anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and move this over like this, just to give it that, to give us more space. So we have base color, which is going to control that. We have things like metallic, which is going to be another really important one. So as I click and drag this right here, we see, okay, now we're seeing some big changes up here. If I rotate around, we might not see much, but if we start playing around with roughness now, say if I go down on the roughness, something pretty low, we can see, okay, now we have a metallic material, right? Feels like metal. And since we have our roughness low now, what I can do is go down on the metallic. And you can see, okay, this feels more diffused, something more closer to plastic, all the way up, it feels closer to metal, right? So roughness is the other really, really big important one. This is going to be basically the blurriness of the reflections, which we're going to be using a lot. And then down here, all the way, we have emission, which is basically if we click this, go into our color wheel here and go up on the value right here, we can have, is this glowing or is it not? So that's how we make a glow material. So there's a lot of other really important ones. Specifically, next up would be bump. We're not going to be using a bump at all in the shader network. So we're just going to focus on those ones to get started. Now I'm going to go ahead and zoom in up here just so we can see this a little bit better. And the first thing we want to do is implement a grunge map. And a grunge map is going to help the metallic feel like it's worn down. So all these textures that we're going to be using are going to be located in the downloads below under sword textures. So what we're going to do is just copy this path, download those, copy this path wherever you have it on your computer. And what we're going to do is simply go to add, and then we're going to go to texture, and then we're going to go to image texture right there. And that's going to be the same image texture that we've been working with our Minecraft, with our checkered, all of that. I'm going to click that, and then we're going to have it attached to our cursor, and we're going to click down just like that to drop it. I'm going to go ahead and open, then I'm going to go and find my textures. And then what I'm going to do is grab my scratches right here. And our scratch map is just going to look like this right here. Just a bunch of scratched metal surfaces. So I'm going to scratch it out JPEG, I'm going to hit open, and there we go. So now what I'm going to do here is just drag and drop the color into the roughness. Why am I doing the roughness? Because we want to break up the reflection. What We want to break that up so it feels, so it's not so clean, right? But we have a problem right here. We have these scratches and everything, but it doesn't feel as broken up as it should be, right? So if I come down here in my color space and switch this over to non-color, we're going to see this magical thing happen, which is all of a sudden this thing feels much, much more believable. We see all these details, what's going on here. So by default, this color space is set to RGB, and we switch over to non-color. Why? Basically, long story short, there's a really long, complicated explanation on color space and all that. The reason for this that I'm going to give you right now is just simply whenever we have a color here, if it goes into base color, we just want to leave these to be default sRGB. And whenever we have a color going into anything else, we want to switch this over to non-color. Again, there's a super complicated reason I'm going to skip over on why that is, but long story short, non-color for non-color slots, and then for color up here, if you're putting down the base color, then you want to stick it on sRGB. So this is looking pretty good. We have a couple more nodes that we want to get to. Specifically, if we want to scale these scratches up and down, that's going to be called tiling. So we're going to be calling this tiling or texture. The nodes we need is for our mapping. So we're going to add, we're going to go to vector, and we're going to come down here to mapping. So what is this mapping node? Basically what this does is I'm going to put this vector into vector. What this does is basically controls how many times we're going to see this. But you notice as soon as we plug that in, it becomes broken. It becomes very, we don't see our texture anymore. This is because the mapping node needs to communicate with our UVs. The same UVs we were working with in our UV editing tab. So what we need to do here is go to add, we'll go to input, and then we'll go to UV map. We're going to click this down, and we'll drag drop UVs into vector. So now we got our network all hooked up. So let's break down what we're seeing here. So basically the way it's working is we have an input from our UVs. So basically our object right here is being sent into our network right here to bring in to basically import our UVs. And then that's going to go through our mapping. And our mapping is going to control how big how essentially scale the UVs are. So if we do something like this, or we do something like 2 and 2, down here in the scale, you see it becomes smaller, right? And then we have that controlling our texture. And then we have that going into our principal BSDF, which is our shader, which is going to control things like reflectivity and whatnot. And then we're setting that into our material output. And that's going to be our very first shader network. So in the next chapter, we'll start customizing this for the rest of our shaders. So we'll start duplicating our blade shader, and we're going to make control how big these hookups. Let's break these communicate. We're going to go to vector, and we're going to come down here to mapping. So what is this mapping node? Basically what this does is I'm going to put this vector into vector. What this does is basically controls how many times we're going to see this. But you notice as soon as we plug that in, it becomes broken. It becomes very, we don't see our texture anymore. This is because the mapping node needs to communicate with our UVs, the same UVs we were working with in our UV editing tab. So what we need to do here is go to add, we'll go to input, and then we'll go to UV map. We're going to click this down, and we'll drag drop UVs into vector. So now we got our network all hooked up. So let's break down what we're seeing here. So basically the way it's working is we have an input from our UVs. So basically our object right here is being sent into our network right here to bring in to basically import our UVs. And then that's going to go through our mapping. And our mapping is going to control how big how essentially scale the UVs are. So if we do something like this, or we do something like 2 and 2, down here in the scale, you see it becomes smaller, right? And then we have that controlling our texture. And then we have that going into our principal BSDF, which is our shader, which is going to control things like reflectivity and whatnot. And then we're setting that into our material output. And that's going to be our very first shader network. So in the next chapter, we'll start customizing this for the rest of our shaders. So we'll start duplicating our blade shader, and we're going to make the guard and the handle and the pommel shaders. So I'm going to go ahead and select my guard up here, and then what I'm going to do here is assign the blade shader to this. I'm not going to manipulate this at all though, because I'm going to duplicate this now. So I'm going to hit that little duplication button right here, and then notice our text right here says blade.001. That's how we know it's been duplicated. So I'm just going to change this over to guard, and then all we have to do here is simply change the base color. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust this color right here. I'm going to make this something like a deeper brown, and I'm just going to control the saturation a little bit, and then darken that value. So these are going to be the final results. We'll have those in the screenshots. And then from here, you see, okay, our scale is going to be off, right? The scratches on here are going to be much smaller than what we have here. So let's go ahead and adjust those. If we go over to our mapping over here, if we set this on something like 0.5 and 0.5, so that's, X, Y for the texture, all of a sudden, then it becomes smaller, and that's going to be much, much more believable. So we'll go ahead and assign the same shader to these up here. So we'll go ahead and select our pommel, select our shader rate, our material assignment right here, and we'll choose guard. And then we'll do the same thing for the tip of the pommel. So we're going to select that, select guard. And there we go. Now we need to adjust this for our handle. So we're going to select that, and we'll go ahead and select our blade for that again. And then what we'll do is go ahead and duplicate this again, and then we'll just go ahead and call this handle. So there's a couple different properties that we want to adjust here. Currently, this is metallic. We don't really want this. We want this to be some sort of material that you can grip. You can think of this as rubber. Maybe it's going to be fabric. Because we're not going to get that specific with this. We can get kind of creative with it. So for example, if I just want to come in here and take my metallic and turn it all the way down, so now it's going to be a little bit more diffused. If I come here to my base color, tone this down, make something like black. It's currently going to be way too sharp. This is that scratch map going into roughness. And we're going to switch this over to this lead plate.tiff. And this is a really good map that I use just for like greasy stuff, things that, fingerprints are going to be on, all of that good stuff. So I'm just going to go in here and we'll now just swap out the scratches.jpg right here. And we can do this just by simply jumping into the file, open an image button right. we can click that. We can go ahead and paste that in here. We go in and choose my lead plate.diff, hit open image, and immediately you'll start to see, okay, we're better, but it's still too clear. This color space automatically gets switched over to sRGB, so we need to switch over to non-color. And then there you'll see, okay, now this is looking more like what we want, which is going to be a bit more diffused, a bit more believable. And then from here, what we do is control the specularity. So the specular slide is going to control how reflective it is. Not in the sense that is it metallic or not, but like if it's a plastic or if it's a rubber, whatever it may be, this is going to be how reflective it is. So I'm going to make a bit lower, somewhere around 0.25 right there. And there we go. That's looking pretty good. And then in the next chapter, we're going to start implementing the glowing runes onto our sword. So here's where we're going to start working on the rune glowing setup. So we're going to jump into our blade here. We're just going to work on the initial node setup. So we're going to need this setup right here. We're going to need a texture, a mapping, and UV map. So I'm going to, instead of building stuff from scratch, we're going to do is just select this and then Control C to copy and then Control V to paste. Now, after you paste, you won't see anything. We have to click and drag down because it's going to paste on top of each other. Okay, so now we have that texture setup all ready to go for us. What we're going to do is bring in the rune stencil. So I'm going to go to my file dialog, and then I'll go to my download, my sword textures, and then I'll go to my runes.jpg. So first off, let's go ahead and take a look at our texture here. So our rune texture is going to look like this right here. It's just a rune text that's going in this rectangular format. So it's not a square texture here. We'll run into a little bit of an issue coming up. So what I'm going to do here is go ahead and plug this into emission. Emission is where things glow. Immediately we're going to see this, right? It's this weird stretchy thing. So why is this happening? This is happening because our aspect ratio here for our runes here is not 1:1, right? It's this really long rectangular shape. So normally I would have this just on a texture. We're going to keep things simple. Just use this as it is. And what we need to do here is now stretch this mapping out to compensate for that. And what we want to do here with this scale right here is have this be somewhere around an 8:1 aspect ratio. So we'll do size and X 8, and then we'll do 1 and Y. And then what we need to do is rotate this because currently it's going vertically, which we do not want. We want this to go horizontally. So we'll switch this over to 90 degrees in our Z axis. And there you go. Now we're starting to see stuff happen, right? So it's not enough. The size isn't right. So what we have to do is go up on the scale here. And what I'm going to do is simply just go something like 80 and 10 right here. And then you see, okay, now this size is something that we would expect, but it still doesn't feel glowing, right? So we have two things that we want to do. We want to make this texture brighter. So I'm going to move this over. And we're going to do that by hue saturation value. So I'm going to add color and then hue saturation. Now it doesn't say value here. But we click in here and then we'll just click and drop onto our network right there. We'll see that we have a classic hue saturation value node right here. And if you use the Photoshop, it's the same exact thing. Now, what we want out of this is the value. Value is brightness. So if I do something like 100 here, you notice that our runes get brighter, right? But something missing, right? We don't have that glow effect. So this is where we go to our EV settings here. So I'm going to go to my properties over here, go up to my EV dialog up here, and then, this is where we were messing with like ambient occlusion. Again, EV is going to be like color and then hue saturation. Now, it doesn't say value here, but we click in here and then we'll just click and drop onto our network right there. We'll see that we have a classic hue saturation value node right here. And if you use the Photoshop, it's the same exact thing. Now, what we want out of this is the value. Value is brightness. So if I do something like 100 here, you notice that our runes get brighter, right? But something missing, right? We don't have that glow effect. So this is where we go to our EV settings here. So I'm going to go to my properties over here, go up to my EV dialog up here, and then, this is where we were messing with like ambient occlusion. Again, EV is going to be the renderer that we're using right here. So it's calculating the reflections and all of that. We used ambient occlusion before, right? That was with our Minecraft. And what we're going to do now is use bloom. And you can see all of a sudden we have a nice glow setup. And if we go down this value, I'm like 50, 25, now you can see, okay, now this feels a lot more believable. There we go. I'll go ahead and move this back over, close the properties up a little bit. And then our last thing here is going to be to colorize this. So what we're going to do is add an add. We'll go to color and we'll do to mix RGB. And then again, we'll go ahead and drag and drop this over our network right here. Just like that. And there we go. Now what we want to do here is colorize this. And we're going to set a blending mode. So if you're used to Photoshop, for example, this is blending modes, just like Photoshop. And what we want to do is set this to multiply. Why we set it to multiply? Basically what that's going to do is allow us to use this color right here to colorize it. We're not seeing much yet, but if we go ahead and move this factor all the way up like this is basically how much is it going to be colorizing this, right? So we do multiply, factor all the way up, and we'll do something like a deep orange color right here. And this is where we can, since we're kind of darkening it with this colorization, what we do is now go really high on this value, something like 500 right there. And that's it. And now what we have to do is actually get this to be in the center of our groove right here. So this is going to be our final node network for this one right there. And then we're going to start working on the assignment for the middle groove next. So now we want to get the runes to actually be in the middle of this groove right here. So the first thing we have to do is set up our assignment. And what we're going to do here is, instead of having this be over the entire blade, what I'm going to do here is now disconnect this emission, right? And what we need to do here is now do a polygon assignment. So I'm going to go to my material setup here. And it's going to be something new. We haven't actually done this yet. So far, our object assignments, which we've been doing right here, so this is how we switch out if we want the checkers, or if we want the blade, that's how we switch out assignments, right? So now what we need to do is set up assignments on individual polygons themselves. So the way we do that, I'm going to go into edit mode here. I'm going to go into my face selection, or by hitting 3. What I'm going to do here is select the these polygons right here. So it should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8 of those. And if I back out here, you'll see that, okay, it's just this right here, just these top ones right here. So I'm going to go ahead and frame that so I can rotate around this a little better. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for the back. So I'll do shift click, select all of those, and then those edges as well. And there we go. So now what we need to do is make an assignment based off of this selection. What we're going to do over here is come over to our material slots. So this list that we see here, what is this thing? Well, basically what we do is, this is what's assigned to the object. And if we do this all plus, we have the ability to assign something new to the object. If I were just to do new right here, currently it's not going to be assigned to anything. I'm going to undo out of that, hit this all plus icon right here. And what I'm going to do here is now hit assign right here. And what that's going to do is assign this slot to these polygons. So this one's going to be assigned to the base object, and this one's going to be assigned just to these polygons. You can see now it's a different color, right? So now what we need to do is assign that same blade to this. So we have a blade right here, we have our new assignment right here, and we're going to select blade. But we just didn't do anything because we have blade selected here, blade selected there. But now what we can do is duplicate this material. I'm going to hit the duplicate button while I'm on this slot right here, duplicate, and then you notice we got a name change right there. I'm going to go ahead and underscore glow, rename it to underscore glow. And now what I can do is simply connect this